Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Nick. I'm your host, and if this is your first time listening, just want to say thanks for listening and welcome. And this is a podcast for family ministry leaders. So if you lead in children's ministry or student ministry, or maybe you're a next-gen pastor and you kind of oversee birth through high school or college, this podcast is for you. And we bring on guests every week to talk about the nuts and bolts of ministry, the principles, the practices, and this week's no different. And we have a great guest today. Our guest is Jessica Bealer. For those of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that Jessica's husband, Frank, has been on the podcast twice, just released his new book, The Myth of Balance, and we just had a great conversation about that a few episodes back. But what you may not know is that Jessica was the children's ministry pastor at Elevation when they both were serving on staff there. And so she led their efforts at all of their campuses. She really played a big role in launching new campuses. And so if you serve in a multi-site context, you're going to love this interview. But if you're like me and you don't serve in a multi-site church, you're still going to love it because she talks about the principles and kind of practices, things they did to create great environments and recruit teams and get them to serve. And all of that still applies. Now, there'll be some great multi-site tips, but all of it applies regardless of your context. You might even serve in student ministry or as a next-gen pastor, and you're still going to love the things she shares. She also shares a ton of documents and resources that they used, and you can get all of that and more in the show notes. That can be found at nickblevins.com/episode 66. One of the things she talks about in this episode is how they responded to and followed up with first-time families. You know, the gifts they gave to kids, what they gave to parents. They had a plan, which I love, for what to give them when they came back a second time, which was great. And what's fun about this interview, but wasn't planned at all, is we have been working to put together a resource that highlights 16 churches and the gifts and the things that they give to first-time families. And it's pretty cool because it just got finished right here in time for this podcast, so we could kind of release them together. Elevation is featured in that resource. If you subscribe to the blog or if you were checking it out on social media, maybe you saw that yesterday I posted that, and you can download that. You can also get it in the show notes. But it's a great resource that is basically just an example of what 16 churches do for first-time families. And some of them have pictures of the resources and the gifts they give, which is great. I think all of us want to do a better job, reaching and keeping new families. You may have heard that most churches keep about 20% of their first-time guests. That's the average. 10% would be lower. 30% would be you're doing really well. And I don't know about you, but I want to do really well. And 30% doesn't even sound great. And so I love seeing what these other churches are doing. And so if you want to see that as well, you can get that resource in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 66. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Jessica Bealer about multi-site children's ministry. Well, it's great to have Jessica Bealer on the podcast today. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. So happy to be with you all today. Excited about it.
So for anyone who isn't familiar with you, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. So I am married to Frank Bealer, who right now is the executive director of Orange, and he's the CEO of Phase Family Centers. That's a mouthful, and you can Google that and find out all about that.
Yeah, I saw he shared the post again recently because people were asking, what do you do again?
Yeah, what is it that you do? And he has he literally has about 50 hats right now. So he's got a lot going on. And he's got a new book out too, so he's got that going on as well. But for the past 17 years, he and I have been doing ministry together. And not always side by side, but I've been in children's ministry specifically for about 17 years. Started at a small plant in Clinton, Tennessee with my dad when I was 19 years old. And it was literally ended up being 3 locations, got up to be about 700 people. It's a very rural community. And so I got to see what really like small town church looks like. And then so that's really pretty much it. I've been there and I've been at the opposite extreme. So for the last 8 years, my husband and I, Frank, moved to Charlotte. And we have been with Elevation Church in Charlotte under the leadership of Pastor Stephen Furtick. And we have truly, truly enjoyed our time there. I mean, it was just so much fun, but also an incredible learning experience for us. I mean, we got to see the church when we first started attending. It was 3 locations, about 1,800, 2,000 people. And over the course of the 8 years, we got to help be a part of seeing it grow to, what it is now, which is 17 locations, 30,000 plus people in those 8 years. And man, whirlwind.
That's crazy. 30,000. You said 3 locations to 18 or 17? Is that what it was?
Yeah. I think it's at 17 now. Although I was talking to a former staff member there that was one of my colleagues, and they were talking that they were getting ready to launch another one in a week or two, and so I think that's number 18.
Yeah.
And I got to launch 16 of those for them. So helped them launch a lot, because I know there's only 17 and you're like, well, there's 3, but sometimes we would launch them, and then sometimes every once in a while you close them down to launch another one. And so got to be a part of launching 16 locations for the children's ministry. I was the children's director for them, and overseeing systems, standards, atmosphere, and launching that kind of thing. And Frank was the family pastor, so he oversaw groups and students and children and really campus life as well. And he was my boss, so that gets real fun and interesting.
That is fun and interesting. And I joke about this. I think when Frank was on, if not the last time to talk about the book, then the first time, but how his role as the family pastor included adult small groups. Like, I don't think any other family pastor role includes adult small groups.
Right.
Or campus life, as you said. That was kind of a hodgepodge job description there. He had a bunch of things.
Well, and he did. He had just like now, he had a million different hats. He was in charge of a bunch of other stuff too. He had some social media roles and some online roles. And of course, I was children's director, but was also, at one point was one of the online campus pastors. And so, funny. You kind of, when you're growing that fast, you just kind of pick up whatever's coming at you and go.
Yeah. That's right. That's why you could say, I don't know, it's been a couple months. They probably have a location or 2 more, than the last time you knew. That's right. So you, obviously a big part of your job was launching new locations.
Yes.
What else? You said some of the consistency and standards and policies and things like that too. So what did it look like? There's the launching, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but when it wasn't a launching season, so to speak, what was your job there specifically?
Right. So, I mean, my job, if we're not in a launching season, which honestly, I mean, we were launching 2 to 4 locations a year. And so we were almost always in a launch season.
Yeah. But
if there were some down weeks or months, because I mean, every once in a while we would have one of those sacred times of 4 or 5 months where we're not launching at campus. And if that was a season, then it really was evaluation. So, I mean, it was me looking at our policies and procedures and saying, do these that we wrote when we were at 6,000 people, do these still apply at 12,000 people? The ones that we wrote at 12,000 people, do these now apply now? I mean, when we first started, we didn't even have a photography policy. I mean, I remember the very first time I looked, we literally didn't have a policy where anyone could walk in and take a picture of a kid and put it on social media. And so, when you're small, you don't actually have to think of all those tiny little details, but the bigger you get, you have to think of everything. So a lot of it was evaluation. And then, of course, strengthening your teams. I mean, that was probably the majority of my job, making sure that they were prepared for what's next. We were always changing. You have to be changing when you're growing that fast. And so it's evaluating their teams and saying, are you strategically ready for whatever's next? And a lot of times that meant that we had a whole season of bulking up their teams and helping them. A lot of times it was a pruning season. It's saying, hey, you got a bunch of people on your rosters and only about half of them are showing up right now. So we need to have some, hard conversations. And so a lot of that, and then a lot of it was health. I mean, you got to take care of your people. You've got to make sure that they are doing well. And so it's sitting down with one-on-one time and saying, how's your Bible study? How is your family? Do you have a hobby? Because you have to have a release at some point. It was strengthening our stakes or it was launching, it was one or the other.
Did you, because I think for a lot of people listening who are in a multi-site context, which is a good number of people and it just keeps growing, right? They're regardless of how they do it, they're probably familiar with the idea of like central team, if they have more than 2 or 3 locations. versus the campus team. And you were, it sounds like obviously more of a central team helping launch campuses. Did you have to like lead and oversee campus children's ministry people, or was your job mostly about supporting centrally and helping launch?
Yeah. So Elevation's model is a little unique. There is a central team. The central team is very, very bare bones. And so on the central kid team was me, who oversaw all of campus life for eKids. So all of the different campus directors reported to me. And then I oversaw the systems and standards. And if we were making changes or if we were adjusting our ministry values, how are we going to get that out? If we were rebranding, because in those 8 years, we probably rebranded 3 to 4 times. It's not changing the names, but, you have to update your logo so that they are still relevant, that type of thing. When we started, everything was really grungy, and then it went straight to clean cut and then to neon. And so, we had to rebrand a lot. And so, working with campus directors to make sure that their signage was up to date and current and that they met all of our current standards. So I oversaw the campus. There was another central team member. Her name was Jessie, which is fun because we were both Jessica, but I went by Jess and she went by Jessie, and she was over the curriculum aspect. And then she had 2 other employees or staff members underneath her, one that helped essentially put the curriculum together, the actual physical, pieces of paper and the supplies, and get those out. And then she had another one that helped write the curriculum. Or a lot of times we would use Orange, and so we would, edit it. And then there was another central curriculum team that was videos, that did all the video editing for us. He would get it from the creative department, but then there's additional editing. And so there was only really about, even with the staffers that were underneath Jessie, there was only about 5 of us from the central. And that's, when you're talking, that many children, 6,000 children. Yeah, that's not really a lot. Yeah. And so our larger campuses had 1 or 2 campus directors, most of them 2. And then our smaller campuses would have, 1 and possibly 1 and an intern. And smaller to us is anywhere from 500 to 800. Medium would be 800 to about 1,500. And then maybe even up to 2,000. Large is 2,000 plus to us, as that's total overall attendees. And kids is always about 20% of that.
Yeah, people can get an idea for how lean the staffing was, because if you're talking about 1 staff at 800, a lot of churches might have that. But sometimes you even had volunteers leading at campuses, almost that same size, or 2 staff at 2,000, like a lot of people listening would think. And there is central, but again, with just 5 of you,
right?
Whatever, 17 or 18 campuses, you can see you were staffed really lean, which is a great thing. So I think it'd be helpful. A lot of people listening are in Multisite. I think it'd be great to hear like how you launched a new location, because you did it so many times that I know you came up with some kind of systems and practices and things you just repeated. You know what I mean? Yep. So what were some of the big pieces when you launched a new location?
Yeah. So, I actually I put a blog out this morning all about systems, because your systems, when you start looking at Multisite, you can really do 1 or 2 locations, and not operate without systems. You still have to, but they don't have to be the strongest systems. They can kind of be, you can make adjustments on the fly. Once you get to 3 or more, you have to have some pretty strong systems in place. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about where we start when we say, hey, we're going to go, and how are we going to do this? So it really starts by us, at the campus or the location that's going to be nearest to the new launch site. We kind of put a filler out. We'll say it from the stage. We'll say, if you're interested in being on the launch team or being on the core team, then go to, the orange tent, or go let us know. And so we start to see our interest. Our goal is to always have a core team or a launch team, whatever your terminology is, that is about 20 to 25% of what your total overall attendance will be. So if you're hoping to launch at 1,000 people, which is what we're always hoping to launch a non-permanent, we're always hoping to launch it at 1,000 plus people for a non-permanent. A permanent is obviously more, but a non-permanent location, then we're looking for 200 to 250 people to help us get that location started. Now, I'm not saying that it always happened that way, but that's our goal, is to have 20% of what the total overall attendance at that campus will be on that launch team. And those people we ask, when they go to sign up, we start having launch team meetings about 3 months out. If we have that timeline, sometimes pastor says we're going in 6 weeks and then you adjust your timeline, but
6 weeks. No problem. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. We launched one campus in 2.5 weeks, and that was insane, and I don't recommend that.
Yeah, but I guess not. Yeah, 6 weeks sounds aggressive. But I've known you've done that before, which is pretty crazy.
It's been a little crazy. I think you always want to jump on the opportunities. Sometimes God provides opportunities, and it doesn't seem the opportune time for you, but, God's opportunities are his best time, and so you kind of just go with the flow and do it. We start putting out some feelers. And we let those people know, hey, if you're going to be on the launch team, that means for the first 12 weeks, you're all in, which means you're there for setup, you're there for teardown, you're there for all of the launch team meetings. You're there every time that the door is open at that new location, you're there. And so we ask them for 12-week commitment. And then after that, we're not releasing them, but they'll go into what's considered a normal volunteer role. But launch season, it's intense. And yet I have never, not a single time have I ever encountered anyone that regretted being on the launch team, because it is such a powerful time and you literally get to watch God move in a very tangible way. And so, we start asking people for if they're interested. Once we fill it out, first of all, before any of that happens, you have to have a location. You have to know where you're going. And so it would really start with the pre-work is really us going to the school or the location, checking out, kind of drawing out a plan of this is where we would put the people at, or the kids, and this is how many people we can or how many parking spaces at, how many people that we can sit in the auditorium. We've had several locations where we could sit more people in the auditorium than we could park the cars. And that becomes a problem. So you're always having to look at how many parking spaces do you have as well. And so, after we scout out the location, we know where we're going. We know approximately how many people is going to be at that location. Then we know how many volunteers that we need to have. So if we say, hey, Rock Hill can seat 1,000 people at this location. Okay, well, then we need a launch team of about 200 to 250 people. And then we put the call out from stage, emails, volunteer rallies, that type of stuff. Once we get that, we start having launch team meetings and things just start to fall into place. I mean, you start ordering your supplies, all that kind of thing. And then for eKids, we always did what was called a haves and needs. I think I've actually written about this before on the blog, but you have a certain number of volunteers and you need a certain number of volunteers, and the stress is that in between,
Sure. Yeah.
And so we would talk about, okay, this is what we have and this is what we need. And say we needed 67 unique individuals on Sunday morning to execute children's ministry, but we only had 42. Okay, well, that means that we need 25 additional people. Well, at least then we know what we need. And so we can stand up on the stage again or in a kids rally and say, hey, we need 25 people. We need 5 that are going to go into preschool. We need 5 in the nursery and the baby and toddler area. We need 10 over here. We need 2. And you can actually tell people what you actually need. And then you'll be able to essentially get what you need. Because if you don't have any clue, if you just say, we need more volunteers, well, that doesn't feel very convicting. But if you're standing there and you're like, I need 2 check-in volunteers, and you've got 10 there, 2 of them are going to sign up if you say I need. So really it's dialing down to what you actually need and then making personal requests if you don't have what you already need, which in most cases you don't.
Sure.
Yeah. And then when it comes to launching, I mean, we got to a point where we had what was called the eKids launch order list. And it took me about 3 launches to get it all put together. It's a 100-page document. But it literally has a picture, a live link, an approximated cost because prices are always changing, and then a description of the area that and how that item would be used and approximately how many you need to order, per capita. And so when it came to actually ordering of supplies, we could pretty much order a campus for children's ministry in about 1 to 1.5 days because we had that document. And I'll tell you, if you are in Multisite right now and you are more than 3 or 4 campuses, start working on that document. It is, a game changer because you can launch quick. When you have that document and you know exactly what to order and there's no searching out for products and all that kind of stuff, you have a good idea of what your budget is going to be. And you know that, okay, we're in 2 weeks. I know approximately I can get all of this stuff in within about a week, week and a half. We can launch in 2 weeks. So it really makes you very agile once you get that document and everything is written down. And so that's kind of the start of everything. Now there's a lot more. How do you run a launch meeting? There's all kinds of things like that. But as far as getting it started, it's about recruiting people to be on the launch team and then identifying the volunteers that you have and what you need, and then getting everything ordered. And of course, keeping those people not only motivated, but informed, because you will lose people along the way if they don't know what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. I imagine, too, that launch guide that you're talking about with the resources and the supplies and the things you buy, what's also great about it, I imagine, is it's probably coupled with here's how we do it. So here's what we need. Yep. But here's and I don't know if this is documented, but a system of here's how we do it. We do this many rooms. We set them up this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, just being able to hit repeat on that is probably really powerful, I would imagine.
Yeah. And one thing, especially if you're talking non-permanent, and non-permanent is my heart. I love permanent too, but I love non-permanent locations, and I can tell you why a little later if we get to that. But if you're talking non-permanent, it's really good to go ahead and map out the rooms before you even make that initial ask for volunteers. Go ahead and map them out. So we would literally put in there, okay, this room is this many square feet, and this is how many pipe and drape and bases and crossbars that we're going to need in this room. This is approximately how many kids that we can have in this room. Because it's one thing for a campus pastor to say, all right, we're going to have 2,000 people at launch when your children's ministry, so 2,000 would mean approximately 400 kids in eKids on the weekends. But if your rooms can only hold 150, then you're in a tight spot. What do you do with all those extra kids? So it's really good to start on the front end by go ahead and mapping out those rooms and seeing how much square footage that you actually have and how many children you can actually safely and carefully serve those families, those kids, because that will help your campus pastor determine what his goal for launch is, because he can't launch at 2,000 if you can't hold 400 kids. So
yep. And I think, have you found, again, you've done it so many times now, it's probably everybody knows the numbers and the system and all that, but I find it very common for churches, whether they're launching into a new building or if it's a new campus or it's a church plant or whatever, to really not understand and take into account what's needed on the children's ministry side. And it's not usually because they don't care. It's because they don't know. You know what I mean? They don't know the numbers. They're not in there. They don't understand that. I'll never forget Reggie Joyner talking about how they didn't build Brownsbridge big enough for kids, which is where you go now, I believe. Right? Yeah. And so a couple of years after they built it, they had to add on. And here's Reggie Joyner, who, if anyone should have had the influence to get the thing built right the first time, it's him. So how did that work there? Did you guys come up with just a pretty clear number and math equations, I guess? Or did you have to keep fighting for, no, actually, we're going to need more here, for kids? How did that work?
Yeah, no, you're always fighting for more space for kids. And not just the space, but, we all have a box, right? we are limited. We always say think outside the box. And yeah, that's a great concept. But when you actually dial it in, we all have a box. We're limited by our budget. We're limited by our space. We're limited by the quality of the space. For example, if I'm giving a gym, like a gymnasium, and I needed to launch a Quest and a Motion, which is preschool and elementary, in that gym, honestly, I can only get about 150 kids. Now, that gym, I could probably squeeze 700 kids in there. Yeah. But the volume, the actual audible volume in that room can't withstand more than 150 kids. And so you may have a campus pastor who it's not that he's against family ministry. He's not at all. I mean, he wants family ministry to thrive because he knows that means that he's going to have a thriving campus. But he may say, oh, you can squeeze 700 in there. And I'm saying, no, you really can't, because we're not going to be able to execute, because we can't speak to our kids in our small groups because the volume is so loud in that room, because it's very, it'll echo. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a constant tension to be managed. I mean, it's a push and a pull at every location. And here's the thing I tell everyone. The campus pastor, the associate campus pastor, the groups pastor, whatever it is, it's not their job to be passionate and to be the loudest voice for family ministry. That's not their job. It's your job. And so it's okay to be loud. It's okay to say, hey, over here, like raise your hand. I need you to focus in on this problem that I have right now. And honestly, over time, the relational, if it's a new pairing of staff members, it may take some time for the relational equity to build. But I mean, I can't even tell you, probably even with a camp, I was once launching a campus and there was no children's director at that location. And I volunteered to not only run all the children's ministry, but to go down to that particular campus and be the children's director until we were able to staff it. And I didn't know this staff member at all. I mean, he was brand new. I didn't know the campus pastor. And it was a little awkward when you literally don't know a person that you're going to be working alongside every day. It was awkward, and it took us a little while. But once he saw my passion for it and the volunteers' passion for excellence in family ministry, he became a voice for family ministry. I mean, we used to call him the campus pastor. What was it that we used to call him? Now, of course, I go to say it now. I'm not going to be able to come up with it. But he was always our advocate. He was of all the campus pastors, he was the one who would say, well, how does this affect children's ministry? And it's because for a very short amount of time, I would bring him in here and I would say, do you see this? This isn't going to work for our special needs families. Or do you see this room right here? This is too full. We're not able to care for the children in this room. And so once he was able to see the passion of our teams, then he was able to get on board too. So just because your campus pastor or your launch pastor or whatever it is doesn't get it at first, it's okay. It's your job to be the voice for family ministry. It's your job to be the most passionate one. And if you are willing to work and to be that voice, you will develop that relational equity, and you'll launch strong.
And it sounds like you brought him in like in the midst of a service, right? To see it in action. That's what you did. You said, hey, can you come check this out with me? Which I think is great.
Yes,
that definitely helps. Sure. I had a few quick questions just to help people understand a little bit more of how it works. You mentioned something I think everybody should know, even though it's obviously not just a family ministry thing, and that's the orange tent. You mentioned like if somebody wanted to sign up to be part of a launch team, come to the orange tent. I think the orange tent, black tent thing you do is pretty cool at Elevation. So can you describe that for us? Yeah. I think people would love to hear that.
Yeah, sure. So we don't really have a guest services area, like a typical, like where there's a desk and there's people that's behind it. We have what's called a black tent and an orange tent. The orange tent is, you go there for everything. So you go there if you have questions about anything, if there was something that was mentioned on stage and you want to get involved with that. If you just want to turn in your communication card and you need a prayer request, you can go to the orange tent for that. You can go to the orange tent to sign up for a small group or to sign up to serve. Or if we're talking about launching, we say, hey, go to the orange tent. So the orange tent is really an encompassing informational area, and there are volunteers. It's not a desk, it's a tent. There are tall tabletops, people just walking around. It's volunteers that are clearly, they have the t-shirt on, so they're clearly marked volunteers, and you can go and you can get information and everything there. The black tent is for if you said the prayer, or if you think you might want to say the prayer for salvation, or if you just really like you need some actual like emotional support after the conclusion of the worship experience, you can go to the black tent. It's also where if you did say the prayer of salvation, you can pick up your Bible there, because we give every new believer a really nice Elevation Bible. And so you can go to the black tent there. So the orange tent and the black tent, it's really simple. Everything, you go to orange. You go to the orange tent. If you're a new believer or you need prayer, you go to the black tent. So it's pretty simple. And I'll tell you, if you're going to go that direction though, those orange tent volunteers need to be top tier level volunteers, because their brains have to hold so much information. because they have to be able to answer any kind of question and help people in any type of way. But it's a very simple model, and it's not very expensive. It's actually very cost efficient because tents are pretty cheap.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the clarity of it. Every week they're hearing, people in the service are hearing, go to the orange tent. And even though it might be for different things, I think what they learn is, if I want to take a step, I just go to the orange tent. You know what I mean? And it's that easy, which is great. You also mentioned the kids rally. Again, that could be a place where you could talk about, hey, we need 12 more volunteers for this new campus. What is a kids rally, and how does that work?
Yeah. So every campus, whether it's a permanent or non-permanent, would have a volunteer rally, and they can name it whatever they want to name it. I mean, I remember one campus called it a rally, and then another one called it the hype or something like that. They can name it whatever they want to. And it's literally just it's not a devotional. It is where the campus pastor is standing up and he's saying, hey, these are the things we're focusing on today. We're going to pray. If you want to go into the worship, the auditorium and pray over the seats, you can, but we're going to pray really quick. And then we're going to go to our respective areas. And so all the volunteers, and the staff at that campus come together, and they really just informational, and then they pray together, and then they break. At that point, a lot of the smaller teams will have their own rally. And so, because that's why we keep the other one so short. And so eKids would almost always have an additional rally type, volunteer type meeting. And that is us getting all together, our leaders getting all together and saying, here's our focus for the day. Don't forget, we've got this special thing coming up next week. We want to make sure that we get these handouts out, make sure that you're talking to the parents on the way out about it. So it's informational. And then it is prayer time together. And I mean, we would have a chant, we'd get everybody excited about it. I also, every time that I led a volunteer rally, a children's ministry volunteer rally, I always took the opportunity to honor someone, because I love pointing to somebody and saying, not only does it make them feel good, but I love pointing to someone and saying, hey, they're incredible. Do it this way, because it gives people a standard. Once again, we're talking about maintaining standards across all these locations. And if you see someone who's doing something well, you need to point to them and say, everyone replicate this. And so at any rally, I would always pick out at least one thing that somebody is doing really well and honor them in that rally as well. And it just keeps everyone focused and going the same direction. And we talked about adaptability and how quickly things change. And there's a lot of change. I mean, that black tent may get moved around. We may change. I mean, there was one time we had 4 different colors of tents, and then we, went down to and so stuff is changing so quickly that you have to kind of have that meeting, because when they are surprised by information, they feel left out and they don't feel important. And so it's really important that in those meetings, you give them all the details, all the information, that you keep them up to date so that they feel like they are part of your ministry and that they are an owner in your ministry.
And this was weekly before the service, right? It's kind of like some churches might call them huddles or whatever, but yours were, I would say, longer, earlier than, most of be familiar with. And if you had, many of your locations had lots of services, so how did you handle, if you had 3 services in the morning, you had a volunteer rally, somebody's serving at the 3rd, did they still come to it? How did that work?
Yeah, so we never had, I won't say never, because I can name 2 instances in which we did do a 3rd, but for the most part, 90% of our campuses since our existence, we've only ever had 2 on Sunday morning. Now, we may have one on Sunday evening or in Sunday afternoon, but we typically have either done a 9 or 11:30 or 9:30 and 11:30. And so we ask everybody to come at that early volunteer rally, because we ask every person to serve every week. I know that's a lot, and I'm not saying that it is a 100% model, because it doesn't work for everyone. Some people have jobs where they have to work on the weekend, every other weekend. But 70% of our children's ministry volunteer base were every week volunteers. And so we asked them to serve one and attend one. And so they would either serve during the 9:30 and then attend during the 11:30, or they would attend during the 9:30 and serve during the 11:30. And so they were all going to be arriving around the same time anyways. So we would say, even if it was a non-permanent and those 9:30 volunteers were also going to be setting up their rooms, their call time may be at 6 a.m., But our volunteer rally is going to be at 8 a.m. We would ask all of our volunteers to be there at 8 a.m. So they'd come in, they'd do their volunteer rallies. We would always provide breakfast for all of them. So it's just incentive for them to be there. It's going to be a warm breakfast. It's always really nice. Pancakes, biscuits, gravy, sausage, really nice stuff. And so they do their rallies, have their breakfast, and then those that were serving would head on into their rooms to serve. Those that were attending would head on into the worship experience, and they'd sit at the front because we want our volunteers leading the way, because we know those people are going to worship big. Their hands are going to be up in the air. And so they'd get prime seating. So it was incentive for them to be there a little early. So we did all of our rallies on the front end. Now, if we had a Sunday evening experience, we would have a different rally. So if, say, the experience started at 5, our rally may be at 3:30 or 4. There was always an opportunity for every volunteer to be a part of the rally.
That's great, because I know a lot of churches struggle with huddles or rallies and getting people there early, but there's a lot of things you said in there that they could take away, from that to help make theirs attended better, make them more important. You're celebrating people, you're feeding them, you're being consistent about it. I think that's really, really helpful, because I think pretty much every leader I know that leads in children's ministry, especially, if they do huddles or rallies or something like that, they're so valuable, because they get people there early, the vision, the encouragement, the prayer, and then just being ready to go, on time or early in the room is great too. Yeah, that's a good thing.
I always tell people when they're considering doing this type of thing, I always say, make sure that your benefits outweigh the sacrifice, at least the perceived benefits. Oh, I'm going to arrive early. I'm going to be able to see all my friends, team members. I'm going to get breakfast. I'm going to get prime seating. Well, why would I not want to get there? I'm already going to have to get there 30 minutes early to get a seat anyways. Why would I not get there an extra 30 minutes or an extra 45 minutes early? So if your perceived benefits outweigh your sacrifices, then you'll get people at the rally.
That's good. So to shift gears a little bit, you've launched a campus, right? And now you have all these campuses. How do you maintain excellence with all these campuses, consistency? Because I think that's a big thing for you all, right? Is if somebody went to this campus and it's 4,000, it's not really like a world of difference between that one and the new one that's 1,000 in the look and feel and all that. So how do you do that, and what does it look like?
Right. It's really not. So we do kind of have two sets of standards. Now, I would say that both of these standards are excellence, but there is a non-permanent standard of excellence and a permanent standard of excellence. And it was my job to make sure that I was overseeing all of those standards and evaluation. I think so many times we'll say, yeah, that's a success, or that campus is doing amazing. But what's your actual, how are you gauging whether they're doing amazing? What does that even mean? Oh, it looks great. It feels great. Well, to you or to who? And so you have to actually write it down. And so we had several documents, and I hate using, I never did. I hate using a scale of 1 to 10, because most of the time people will say, oh, it's a 7 or 8. Well, because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but it really wasn't a 7 or 8, or it really truly was a 7 or 8, or maybe it was a 9 and 10. And that person, it's always cryptic. What does that actually mean? And so we would always pick two things that we want them to be, they needed to encompass both of them. So, for example, our check-in area, so eKids check-in, we want them to be efficient. We have a lot of families, and we need to churn through them and get them into their rooms. At the same time, an effective check-in process is also one that connects with the family. So how can we be effective and connect with families and also be quick and get them in their rooms? And so those are the two things that we would gauge. We would put a diagram, and we would say, are you effective or are you efficient? Do you fall in the middle? Because we always want to fall in the middle. And so that's kind of how we would rank it. And if we were talking about small group leaders, we would say, are they flexible or are they prepared? Now, we want them to be both. But if they prepared to the point to where they can't be flexible, or if they're flexible to the point where preparation isn't needed, neither one of those is good. And so we have to fall somewhere in the middle. And so we would give them, here are your two things that you need to be. You need to be both prepared and flexible. Hopefully you fall in the middle. And so we had a way of just going in and literally evaluating them. Obviously, the more campuses you get, the harder it gets to evaluate them. I used to go, I would go once a month to all of the locations. Once we started adding a ton, it was every other month. And then it had gotten to be where I was trying to get it to where it was once a quarter. And at that point, it wasn't enough, and I needed to add a staff member. So I brought on another staff member and said, hey, I need you to help me evaluate these. And she traveled around with me for a little while, and I and showed her what it is that you're looking for. I mean, the other thing too is we had a document that had what all of our signage was supposed to look like, what our check-in area was supposed to look like, what our small groups were supposed to look like, the rugs that were supposed to be in the rooms. And you can literally take that document with the pictures, walk to each of the rooms and put checks or X's down to what needed to be updated and what didn't. Our goal was to always feel like Elevation, to always feel like Eve Kids, whether we were in an uptown theater or 100-year-old school in Rock Hill. We always wanted to feel like Elevation. I mean, even down to the scent. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but Elevation has its own scent. We have scent machines.
I did not know. Oh, I did know that, but I didn't hear that from you. I didn't know the details, so I'd love to hear what that means.
Yeah, there's a company that you can literally create your own scent, and we sent some of our people down and said, all right, let's go create our own. And so every building that you walk into, whether it's a school or whether it's a permanent, if it's a permanent building, it's just being funneled through the air conditioning units. If it's a non-permanent, then we actually have scent machines that we hide behind pipe and drape. But when you walk into the building, it smells like Elevation. And that's our point. We want everything to feel excellent, to feel like Elevation everywhere we go. And that has to come, or that only comes with a lot of evaluations. You have to always have your eyes on those campuses and making sure. I mean, even down to when a toy breaks, they can go to that launch order list and reorder that exact toy. So we have the same toys in all of our rooms, whether it be a non-permanent or a permanent. The exact same toys are being played with. So if a family visits our Rock Hill location, which is now a permanent location, but then they go to, say, our Concord location, which is a non-permanent, and their child is in the 2-year-old room, their 2-year-old is going to have the same experience, the same lesson plan, the same toys, the same smell in both rooms.
And I don't want people to miss either what you just said, because I think a common struggle in multi-site world will be, okay, our campuses aren't the same. So if I evaluate them, they're not the same. But really the problem is not necessarily the campus kids pastor or whatever. It could be that they've never been equipped. You have a guide and a system, and you've equipped them with exactly what it should look like. So therefore you can then hold them accountable to that, because they know there's no ambiguity. You know what I mean? They're trained to know what it should look like. So then it's easy to come back around and say, oh yes, that's exactly what we're going for. Or no, this isn't quite there. I think that's important. And so maybe that's a step for people, is to develop that. Like, what is that guide? Right.
And I mean, right. That's exactly right. And the thing is too, I mean, you have to write it down. I mean, you can say it's a standard, but it's not really a standard until it's written down. I mean, we actually had a closing procedures document that was made at the same time for both a permanent and a non-permanent location. Now, obviously, even those documents looked the same. They have the same, creative design on them, the same color scheme. One was like 8 and the other one was like step 15, because it's more intricate to tear down and set up a non-permanent than a permanent. But even our tear down procedures at every location are posted, because we want them we all want them to sterilize everything and to clean everything and to put it back the way they found it. And so you have to, if you expect it, it needs to be written down somewhere.
That's good. That's true. I have to ask this question. So how would you describe what Elevation smells like? What is the Elevation scent like?
Yeah. So it's really, really clean. It does have kind of a citrusy scent to it. But I don't know. I think it's probably more of like it's not really linen, but it's definitely like a fresh, like a clean smell. But then it has this kind of citrus twang to it. I don't even really know. It's so unique. I mean, you walk in, it's funny. People talk about it. They talk about that, and they talk about the mints, because there's unlimited mints. You can literally, nobody says anything to you. You can literally, fill your entire purse up with mints, and no one will say anything to you about it. That's
a thing at our church too, particularly kids, because we have mints, and they love it. Like we had a week at camp last week, and we realized we actually had to take the mints away. They took all, like in one day, took all the mints, and they found the bags where like the storage in the closet, and emptied 3 bags. We were like, okay, so maybe not every day during camp, We'll bring those back out Friday night, when parents are here and whatever. So that's awesome. I love you. And I think having the citrus smell and it makes you think of clean was probably very intentional too, because that's what, that people want that, especially in kids world, but even in a church, I don't know that that's the dominant thing you think of when you walk in a lot of churches. So that's probably a good choice.
Right. They do alter it at Christmas time. At Christmas time, they go for an apple cinnamon, just a very classic smell. And it's nice because the first week of December, you walk in and you're expecting that smell and you're like, oh, it's a smell, but it's different. And then of course in January, they go right back to the other. But again, that's all intentionality. It's just about intentionally, like making decisions and setting standards in place that impress and wow people.
And I think how you document it and work on it and improve and share it, like that's probably the key that a lot of multi-site churches can take away from this is, how do we, if we're replicating something, then like you're saying, it needs to be documented.
Yes.
And how do we make sure that we're always updating that? So if something changes, we don't just change it. We also change the document. So the next time it's good too. And I know there are plenty of churches where multi-site's far more loose, right? I know in multi-site world, sometimes you'll talk about high control versus more flexible or freedom. And elevation is clearly on the high control side. You're trying to replicate the same thing. But even if you were given more freedom, I would say, I don't know, you probably agree, that why not have like a best practices document? And if you don't use it, okay, but at least like we've tried this and here's some recommendations.
That's exactly right. We actually had it's funny that you said best practices because every week, so we had a weekly meeting of all of the children's director, like the campus staff and me, and we would sit down. So interns, if you were on a campus on the weekend, you would sit down with me in a room. We used to call it the fishbowl because it was a clear room, and we would sit down in this room and we would talk about our best practices. And it wasn't just best practices, that's what we called it, but it was also the things that were not working. We had one campus that was struggling with securing a stairwell. And for whatever reason, the way that this building was made, the stairwell just never occurred to the security team to make sure that it was secure and safe. And there were always volunteers coming up and down it. And we were worried at some point that somebody was going to get in there that didn't need to be in there. And so they said, well, I want to try this new, the check-in system, the programming that we had a way to actually put an identifying number on the name tag for the kid, and it would print it out. It was different than how we had been doing it. It would print it out for the parent. So we tried this different kind of way to do the system that we already had, and it worked wonderfully. And so we were like, all right, in best practices, this problem came out. We sat around the table, we talked about different solutions. One of the directors said, I think that this will do this. So we tried it for 3 months. It worked wonderfully. It actually did things that we weren't even expecting it to do. And so when she brought it back to the table 3 months later at that same best practices meeting, she said, this is doing this, and I didn't even know it. And essentially what she was seeing is that parents were being more engaged with their ministry instead of just flashing a tag, which is what they did. They would actually have to put the number, stick it on their person. And so people would say, oh, you have a kid in eKids? Yeah. How are they liking it? And so they would engage more with our ministry. And so it ended up being a change that we made universal, and it all came out of a best practices meeting. And so if you are multi-site, get all of those campus directors in a room a lot, like do it weekly, at least monthly, but I would encourage weekly or biweekly, and talk about what's working and what's not. It's okay to even try some things at campuses as long as it's a true test run. And if something's working, then make it a universal, change and do it everywhere.
Yeah, that's good because everybody can learn from each other, and you're probably always changing staff and bringing people on. And so it helps them to be around other leaders. Well, we have a little bit of time left. Unfortunately, probably not enough time to get to all the questions I have, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the first-time guest strategy. You've written about this a bit. I know this is like a big thing that children's ministry people, but even student ministry folks want to hear about. We all want to do a good job with first-time guests. And so what did that look like at Elevation? A family comes for the first time. Kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, and it is pretty intricate. So I'm just going to start at the beginning and tell you what actually happened. The strategy behind it is simply to wow them. I mean, we want them to be getting in their car. We want them to not only have connected with our ministry, but to make an impressive impact. So like they are literally getting into the car talking about it. I always tell all our teams, our goal is to create remarkable moments that families will get into their car and remark on. And so that's the goal. And especially for those first time guests, we want them to get into their car and talk about the incredible experience they had. And so here's kind of how we make that happen. So when they pull into the parking lot, there is a sign. I know lots of churches have this now that says, put your flashers on if you are a first-time guest. If they're a first-time guest, then they get parked the closest to the building that they possibly can. I mean, they are right at the door. When they open the door and they take 2 or 3 steps away from their car, we have a volunteer team there waiting for them. They receive it's not really a brochure. It's more like a packet because it's like laminated, and there's a CD in it. They get a free CD as soon as they get out. There's information about the church. Also, just a little side note, we make that so large. It is very large. I mean, it's probably 14 inches. It is very large. It's so large that it won't fit into a purse. You can't fit it
on purpose, so you can't hide it.
Exactly. So everywhere they go, they have to hold that, and it tells every volunteer this is a first-time guest. And so they get out of the car, and if they have kids at that point, then the volunteer will walk them over or into the building or wherever it is. If it's a non-permanent, they'll walk them over to the eKids check-in desk, and they will introduce them to our first time. Like there's several lines, but there's a first time area. And so they go over there, and as mom or dad is filling out the information, we keep it really brief, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But as they're filling it out, we have volunteers who have been trained on how to talk to the kids, because our goal is to engage them from the first moment that they are with us. And so they're down on their knees talking to the kids, trying to, get some information out. What school do you go to? What's your hobby? That kind of thing. So that there's something to converse about while we go through this process. They also put what's called a lanyard, the eKids lanyard, on the child, and it's a 4x4-inch square printed card. It's nice, but it's on just a plastic black lanyard, and they put it on the child, and they say, make sure you keep this. This is going to be gold to you all day. Like, you're going to use it several times today. Make sure that you wear this. So it's going on the child. As long as the child is 3 years or older. We're not putting necklaces on babies, but
that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. No choking hazards. But if the child is 3 years or older, they're going to get a lanyard. So we finish up the information process. We do not enter that information at that point. It just takes too long. Our first time guest process, the check-in process, is a 2-minute process. We have a lot of people coming in, and we need to connect with them, get down on the knees, but at the same time, we need to get them through our check-in process and get them into their room so they can have their wonderful experience. So we then walk them to the classroom. That volunteer will walk them to the classroom. So they stay with them, that eKids volunteer. At this point, the eKids volunteer will take over. The other volunteer who greeted them at the car will go back out into the parking lot. The eKids volunteer will walk them to their class. As they're walking into the class, they're telling them about this lanyard. They're telling them, hey, make sure that you show your lanyard to your small group leader. Make sure that you take it to the orange tent at the end of the day, because there's going to be a present there for you at the end of the day. Make sure that you bring it back the next time you come, whether it's next week or next year. Whenever you come, put it in your glove department or the glove box of your car, and bring it back the next time that you come, because you're going to get prized the second time you come too. So they're telling them all about the lanyard process. They go in. Now, here's the thing with the lanyard. It's a very bulky card. It's a 4-inch by 4-inch square card that hangs around a child's neck. It tells everyone. It's like a blinking sign, just like that big long pamphlet thing is for the parent. It's a blinking sign to volunteers. This is a first-time guest. This is a first-time guest. So everywhere they go, they get, hey, so glad that you're here. So glad you made it today. You're a first-time guest. And of course, the kid is like, how'd you know I was a first-time guest? And they're kind of, like maybe even overwhelmed, but blown away that everybody knows that they're a visitor. Once they go into the experience, the children's experience, parents drop them off. Parents go into the adult experience. Kids go into the children's experience. Once they're in that room, that lanyard does something really special. So we're not even backwards about it. We absolutely totally rigged the large group game so that if you have a first-time guest on your team, you're much more likely to win.
Nice.
So that lanyard is going to get them bonus points, enough bonus points to win the game. Well, all of our regular attenders know that that's about to happen. So as soon as that first-time guest walks in, all of the regular attenders want that first-time guest on their team. They're all vying for their attention. They all want them in their small group. And so there's instant camaraderie, instant, like, I have friends here. These people want me to be here. And so, and then of course they're going to win because their lanyard's going to give them enough bonus points to win the game in large group. And so that's fun. And then at the end of the day, when parents pick them up, they're going to go to the orange tent, and the child's going to get a special gift. It's changed a couple times over the years. We had some custom sunglasses at one point. We had a custom poster at another point. Right now it is a slap bracelet, an eKids slap bracelet. Super cool. It's like, It's not super cheap. It's like a really nice, like rubber one. And so they take it. Then when they come back the next time, if they bring it back, it doesn't even really matter. We have a way in the system that we make sure to mark that that the next time they come, there's a second time guest. When they come back the next time, they're going to get a eKids t-shirt, glow in the dark. It's got, they're going to be a walking advertisement for us. We want to put clothing on them. And so we send them out with this lanyard, hoping that they bring it back. But even if they don't, we're prepared to give them a second time guest. Now, while they are in their kids' experience, those volunteers are entering that information. They're also writing a personalized postcard. And the postcard is then delivered to the small group leader before the end of the worship experience. And the small group leader writes a personalized message, hey, Joy, so glad that you were with us this morning. Great job with that game. Thanks for answering a bunch of questions. Make sure you come back next week. It's a personalized postcard. It gets mailed out that week. So they're getting greeted at the car. They're getting special parking. They're getting greeting at the car. They're getting a quick check-in with a personalized volunteer that literally is going to stick with them through the whole process. They are going to get bonus points. They're going to win the game. They're going to walk out with a slap bracelet. They're going to come back the next time and get a t-shirt. Mom and dad, there's reserved seating for first-time guests in the auditorium because first-time guests are slower than everybody else. They don't know the policies and the procedures, and they don't know how to get where they're supposed to go. And so there are seats in the auditorium that are reserved for them, and they are prime location seats. So their first experience is going to be the very best version of us that we can give them. Now, throughout the week, the child is going to get the postcard. There's going to be an email that comes directly, a personalized email that comes directly from the kids director at that location. They're also going to get a call from our volunteer team asking them if they had any questions. And then they'll get a letter in the mail from the campus pastor. They're going to get 4 contacts over that first week. We have done everything possible that you could possibly imagine to connect with first time. I mean, when Frank and I first came, I think you probably read this, but when Frank and I first came to Elevation, they were delivering pizzas.
Yeah,
I will never forget. I opened the door on a Tuesday afternoon and there was Pizza Hut. And I was like, I didn't order pizza. And they were like, Elevation wanted to, serve your family dinner tonight. And I was like, wait, what? And we were already planning on going back because we had such a great time. But it was something that was like, oh, they're thinking about me when I'm not even there. And that's the goal, is to make them feel like they are an owner or a part of something from the very beginning. Like this is a piece of them now. And so anything that you can do, anything at all, it doesn't have to be expensive. Anything that you can do to make them feel special and wanted and make them feel welcome to come back again, do it. Go to the extremes.
I like how you also made sure you coordinated this like follow-up plan or first-time guest plan with your overall church plan.
Yes.
Right, because you mentioned they get the personalized email from the kids director. They're also going to get this from the campus pastor. Because sometimes I could see where churches may not work together, like teams within the church, and so they're getting like 18 contacts or whatever. Because you haven't thought, oh, wait a minute, they're getting this here. So that's important too, obviously.
Yeah, tear down those silos anytime that you can. I mean, we always tend to draw lines in the sand and say this is children's ministry or this is family ministry and this is the rest of the church. Tear down those silos as much as you possibly can. Erase those lines and try your best to work together. It'll be, you'll grow faster if your ministry has a comprehensive strategy versus 2 separate ones that are battling, for attention.
Yeah, it definitely communicates something we don't want to communicate if they are getting all these messages and it's too many and they don't seem like they're working together.
Yes.
Well, this has been great. And unfortunately, we did not have time to get to our last topic, which I won't say, because what we'll do is we'll have you come back on and we'll just talk about that.
Okay.
I'll say it. It was caring and appreciating volunteers, especially in a multi-site context, but everybody cares about that. So that'd be a great one just to talk about in one podcast. We'll link to a bunch of your blog posts in the show notes where you've written about a lot of this, the lanyards and the first time guest and launching sites and all that. Lots of great content in there. But is there anything else, any other way that people can connect with you if they have any questions or anything like that?
Yeah, they can just, you're going to put the links on there, but they can go to familyministry.church. That's my blog, my site. There's some ways to get in contact with me there. I do a little bit of consulting. So if you heard anything and you think, hey, I would like to have her come and put her eyes on my ministry, I can do that. So you can actually contact me through the site. So familyministry.church is where you can reach me at.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, thank you for this time. It's been really, really helpful. And thanks for continuing to write about it too, every week.
Yeah.
Putting out
Thanks
great
for having
posts.
me. I just want to just brag on you for just a second. I just feel like you are doing an incredible job. I mean, your voice in family ministry in Next Gen right now is just incredible. So thanks for bringing light to all these subjects and having some great podcasts and guest speakers. I don't know about this one, but all the other ones have been amazing.
Oh, this one will be great too. And I've loved it. Thank you for the kind words, but it's just been a lot of fun to interview people like you and get, learn from their experiences. And I really love, just like this podcast, hearing the details too. You know what I mean? What did it look like? How did it work? I just think that's so valuable. And you get that a little bit like at conferences or on people's blogs, but sometimes you just don't get the conversation. You know what I mean?
It's
like,
true.
oh, tell me about that, or how did that work? And so it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it, and I hope others have enjoyed it as well. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I love talking shop with you today.
I know what you're thinking after that interview. You're thinking, how does one family have so much talent, right? I mean, Frank's an amazing leader. It's been an excellent guest on the podcast, sharing so much wisdom. Jess here, sharing a lot of wisdom from children's ministry and leading in a multi-site environment. I don't know how in the world she was able to do that at Elevation with the rate at which they were growing and adding campuses, plus leading the existing campuses. It's just crazy. They're a great couple doing amazing things for ministry, and I'm excited they're working for Orange because I think for all of us, we get the benefit from that. Like, we were benefiting from it at Elevation because they were very open-handed and shared things, and that was awesome. But now that they're working for Orange, whether you use curriculum or not from Orange, there's tons of resources that they're going to create. And Jess mentioned that you could also bring her in to help you in your children's ministry, and I would highly recommend that. I think an outside voice is something we all need regularly, once a year, certainly once every few years. And so if that's something you're interested in, you can contact her. Just go to the show notes to find out how to contact her, to download a bunch of the resources she was talking about. That's at nickblevins.com/episode 66. Here are a few action items I had coming out of that interview. One is to evaluate your ministry. Maybe that's not something you do regularly, and you could take the documents she shared in the show notes there and that they use at Elevation and use that to evaluate your ministry and make some improvements. You could also do another action item is to do a haves needs list for your ministry so you know where you stand. Like, maybe you're not launching a campus, but it'd be really good to just be clear on, here's how many volunteers I have, here's how many I need, here's how many I want. You could always throw that in there too. And then the third thing is, we kind of finished the conversation talking about first-time families, and that resource that I mentioned in the beginning is available that highlights 16 gifts, that churches are giving to first-time families. Take that resource, take what Jess talked about, and evaluate your first-time family process. How well are you doing? Can you figure out how many of the first-time families are actually sticking long-term? What can you do to help encourage them to come back, to make it personal somewhere early in the journey, to make that kind of connection that would encourage them to come back? So those are three big things. I wouldn't try to do them all. I'd pick one and say, what's the one I can focus on now? I think that would be really helpful. Well, next week, you'll hear my interview with Kenny Conley. Kenny's a great friend. He's a next-gen pastor, and we talk about the 5 things to focus on in your first year in a next-gen role. Kenny just recently, in the last year, moved to a new church, so he's in his first year, or wrapping up his first year, and he has great wisdom with these 5 things to focus on. And if you serve in kids ministry or student ministry, these are still really important. You'll want to listen to those. Kenny also is one of the ones who's going to be leading some of the mastermind groups that are launching this fall. I didn't talk about that in the intro of this episode, but if you're interested in that, you want to be in a group with other leaders similar to you for 7 months and talk about what's working, what's not working, get input, get coaching, kind of build that community there. We're doing a lot of fun stuff with those groups. We'd love to have you, and Kenny's going to be leading 2 of those, and you can find out all about that in the show notes as well. So go ahead, check that out. We'd love to have you be part of the mastermind. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, so you'll know when the one comes out next week with Kenny, and I'll see you in that next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.